Dr. Kerem?
Hi, how are you?
Good, good. Shalom lecha.
שלום לך.
אני מצטער, אני מעדיף מדבר אנגלית או אספניולית.
Whatever. מה שבא לך.
Yeah. I was looking at your curriculum vitae, just incredible.
Thank you.
Yeah, just everywhere. I can't imagine any university that you haven't been a guest lecturer at.
There are some, but you saw.
Can I ask you a favor? Do you have a presentation, or are you just going to be lecturing?
No, I didn't prepare a PowerPoint. I'm just gonna.
Okay, that's fine. That's fine. I just wanted to make
sure.
Talk and
read, and I'll see. If the people are into it. If it's too highfalutin, if it's
That's fine. No, I just wanted to make sure that you had, if you were going to share something, that I gave you the authority to share. So we're
no
good.
problem. No problem.
Okay,
No,
we're
it's
good.
like I spent a lot of time preparing this, but I didn't think that I would prepare, slides because
No, that's fine. That's fine. Yeah,
it's not like an issue of pictures here and stuff like that.
Yes, yes, of course. Yes.
So tell me about your kila.
So our congregation is very interesting. We were meeting in our home for many years. I'm a full-time engineer. I think I may have mentioned that.
Yeah, I got that.
Yeah, but about 15 years part-time. I went to Siegel, I went to Spertus. There was a smicha program, all part-time. I would go to Chicago, come back. It would kick me off the streets, I like to tell people, out of gangs. And so I got smicha, and I got the master's and the doctorate. We started meeting in our homes. We just had a few families for many years, and then all of a sudden, about 3 years ago, we started growing. There were many individuals who were b'nei anusim. They said, "Hey, we have some Jewish background. We want to learn." We had some converts. We had some people who were from already Jewish, and we started growing. And at one time, we have a small house. We had 77 people in our tiny house. And it's like we don't fit anymore. So we looked for a space very close. We're the only synagogue in Grand Prairie, Texas, which is between Dallas and Fort Worth. We moved into a building last November. We have almost 100 people, with about a little less than half of that are kids.
That's good.
And we're like a UTJ, Union for Traditional Judaism. We have separate seating, but we don't have a mechitza. We have Orthodox sidurs, but we're very open, very traditional, but very open. And there's a lot of excitement. A lot of people have a lot of passion for learning. Very good group of people, just very unique. A lot of people are, sort of connecting with Judaism, whether they're Jewish or maybe they have some Jewish ancestry later in life. So it's a big passion for them, and it's exciting. I mean, we have about I would say about 85 to 90% of our liturgy is Sephardic. We have a couple of Ashkenazic tunes that we do. A lot of stuff from Turkey, Turkish, Moroccan, S&P, Spanish, Portuguese. It's a very lively group, very nice, just a heartfelt group. I don't get any money from it. My wife does. She's the Rebbitzin. We just passion. We just do this out of for our kids. We have 3 kids, and we just that's what we do. So it's a good group. I'm excited. We're getting about a speaker a month. We had Dr. Mark Shapiro last month. We've got Dr. Matt Goldish next month. I have another professor who's going to speak on crypto Judaism sometime in the fall. We had Rabbi Peter Tarlow and Rabbi Frank Joseph speak. And then I'm going to be speaking at one of their congregations about crypto Jews. So, so I do some speaking once in a while, and it's good. We're just trying to get general education for everybody. And I remember you reaching out to me when I had done that Sefarad lecture. So I wanted to, bring you in, and just the expertise you have on Greek Jewry is just amazing. So
yeah, I've come to Dallas a lot for the annual Scholars Conference of the Holocaust. But in the beginning, they only told me there's Chabad, and then everything is hidden and secret and select. So 2 years ago, I stayed with a Haredi family in the middle area.
Hmm.
Okay. But once they refused to let me come for Sudat Purim to the modern Ashkenazi synagogue. Rabbi
Why?
wasn't very nice.
Why would they not allow you to
I
come?
won't forget. I won't forget that. Okay. Yeah. Okay. I don't know whether it's called Sharet Tefillah or something.
Yeah,
Anyway,
yeah, I know. Yes, I know.
yeah, yeah, no. It's like they have no room. They could care less. I've been to the Mizrahi synagogue a few times.
Young
Like,
Israel or Achdut Israel?
what's it called?
There's Young
Israeli.
Israel. Young Israel. Young Israel is the synagogue that's close to Sharia Tefillah. It's mainly
No,
Israelis.
it's not that. No. Anyway, I think it's a different area.
Okay,
Anyway, so I've been there a few times because the conference coincided with Purim. So, you know, I had to hear the Megillah and all that and have a Sudat Purim. A few times I went to Chabad. Long time ago, I would come and stay with the Chabad guys. Yeah, but so I didn't know about you. I'd like to come sometime, obviously I
sure,
have to,
sure, absolutely.
stay by you and all that. But yeah, I've been to Fort Worth too, but a long time ago. But I've been to Dallas for Shabbat many times already.
Oh, very nice, very nice.
But
Yeah,
you're a hidden secret. You're a hidden secret.
well, we're trying to be out more in the open.
Right, I know it's fun.
Yeah, we are we're part of the Jewish Federation of Greater Dallas, but we're actually in Tarrant County, which is Fort Worth, Arlington, those cities.
Uh-huh.
So I
Yeah.
met with the executive director, and they're trying to consider whether we can list us on both, to
Uh-huh.
have a little bit more visibility. But we appreciate you speaking because it actually, you know what, we put it on the Jewish Federation calendar. We put it on Facebook for people to see, and we have might have a few people that are coming because they saw you on Facebook, and
Hmm.
so
Yeah,
we're
no,
excited.
for me, it'll be an opportunity. I hope I won't run you too dry.
No, no, no,
But
absolutely not.
anyway,
I didn't realize that you had a PhD from is it University of Aristotle?
Aristotelian University.
Aristotelian. I think on your curriculum vitae it says
Yeah, well, in
Aristotle.
English it's Aristotle. Yeah, okay.
And Thessalonica, right? Or Thessalonica?
Yeah,
Oh, interesting.
Salonika to you. It's
Yes, yes.
you're Spartak, you say Salonika.
Yeah. So very
Yeah.
appropriate for your
So,
topic.
well, yeah. I mean, what I know about Aristotle is not from Greece, but yeah. So, like I don't really deal with this conflict, okay? But it's a learning experience. I more by circumstance, and when I've been asked to do things, then I've learned I deal with ancient Greek thought, Hellenism, paganism, early Christianity, Jewish roots of Christianity. But more of my focus is obviously contemporary, late medieval, et cetera, et cetera. So all these things forced me to delve into new areas. And so otherwise I deal with Greek Jewish relations, but I don't deal with Hellenism per se.
Okay.
So all this is but I'll this will lead into more contemporary Sephardic rapport toward Greek thought and philosophy, which will be eye opening to you.
Good. Good. That's fantastic.
So I mean, as you know, I stay up late a lot, so I
Yes,
thought I would start at 4 o'clock. But actually, I had to force myself to stay up tonight. So I had chocolate ice cream. I had a lot of coffee. Run around, wash dishes, all that stuff. But, yeah.
well, we
So
appreciate your openness with your schedule. So that's
right, because you sometimes I go on Zooms very late, but very very rare that I speak so late. Yeah. Anyway, whatever.
Okay. So I think we have a few minutes. People are still joining, and give them an opportunity to join.
And I'm a historian. I don't deal with Jewish thought, so sometimes you go off on a limb a little when you do new things. I think but
No, that's
you
good.
notice
Yeah.
you have to be on the ball when you're on new turf.
Well, that's good. That's good. We appreciate it.
I don't expect anyone's gonna put me on the spot here, but
Well, I think the challenge says, I was listening to, I forgot what rabbi I was listening to. He was saying, you want an educated community, but you don't want them too educated that they get bored, with a Devar Torah or something that you give. It's like a balance, right? You want to teach them, you want them to learn. So it's always like it's good. It's a good challenge to have. So
I mean, my wife's father was a frustrated rabbi, so he didn't have such a glamorous life because of that. But in academia, it's a little speaking is a little more enticing
yeah.
than in congregations for the long haul, I would say.
So I think it's 7 o'clock. I think maybe we can wait 1 minute or just a few seconds. We got still people joining, but I'll give you just a very brief introduction. I want to give you as much time as possible to talk.
We have two arroyos here.
Yes, we do. Yes. And are you still at the Hebrew University? Because I was looking at.
Officially, yeah, but
Okay.
I'm telling now.
Okay. And then you're still part of the Holocaust Institute at the Bar Ilan?
Yeah, that's more active.
Okay. Okay.
And
Okay. So I think we'll go ahead and start if that's all right.
yeah.
Okay. Well, let me start off by thanking everybody who's joined us. It's a pleasure to have everyone. You know that this is part of our ongoing series of speakers, whether we have them in-house at the synagogue or online. And we're very privileged to have Dr. Yitzhak Kerem with us this month. Um, I could go on and on in terms of his curriculum vitae. I just wanted to mention some highlights. As I mentioned, he's at Bar Ilan University at the Holocaust Institute, and he's a fellow at Finkler Institute for Holocaust Studies. And he's also still connected with the Hebrew University of Jerusalem. He's been involved with the e-publication Sephardic. Is it Yechamizrach? Is that the
Sfarad Mizrach now.
okay?
Okay.
Okay.
Sfarad and
For,
the East.
yes,
Okay.
yes. Formerly Sepharad, I think the Sephardic newsletter. He's also had connections with the National Library of Israel, the Genealogy and Jewish Studies reference. And if you look at his curriculum vitae, I'll just say this: it's just extremely impressive in terms of his studies with, especially with Greek Jewish relations. And I encourage everybody to do so. In fact, I'll put it in our WhatsApp chat. I'll just give you a link for that because it's just so extensive. I couldn't do justice to it. So, Dr. Kerem, thank you so much for joining us at Congregation Zohar Yisrael. We're excited about your topic, and then we'll just give you the floor, and maybe we can save a few minutes at the very end for some questions. But other than that, please take the floor.
Thank you very much, Rabbi, and to the congregation. I'm going to talk about the conflicts around Maimonides, the Rambam, and in a larger extent, what is Judaism or Sephardic Judaism's rapport to Greek philosophy? So Maimonides in his time was very controversial, very detested. Today, he's our ultimate star. He's our ultimate philosopher, our ultimate thinker. but in his day, he was very, very controversial. He was influenced by someone 2 generations before him, a Muslim, call him a medical thinker, Al-Farabi. Okay. And Al-Farabi philosophized a lot about Greek philosophy. During this period in the Middle Ages, many Muslim thinkers dealt with Greek philosophy. And the Jews, you'd say, joined in, copied them, argued, felt challenged. So Maimonides, his Guide for the Perplexed, Moreh Nevuchim, at the time was very, very controversial. Now, he based himself in the beginning about Aristotle from Al-Farabi. There's a gap of like 2 centuries. And then he does quote Aristotle. And everything around this controversy is basically like hearsay, bias, very little really checking and verifying who said what and what are the sources. So in Moreh Nevuchim, he had an introduction. He talked about his sources, but he didn't quote people. Okay. And so that from the beginning, that was the accusation. And everything is full of paradoxes and hypocrisy. And so on one hand, you have to take everything with a grain of salt, but this is very significant for us as Jews. And in our basis, Maimonides, the Rambam, is the ultimate thinker for us today. Okay, and many people come from very different angles, but at his time, it was like, boy, did he have gall. Okay, so for example, he meshed Greek philosophy and Judaism, but not in its entirety. So in the slander, for example, he was slandered that he used Greek philosophy to prove that God existed, that God created the earth, and basically he accentuated what Greek philosophy added. So Greek philosophy was revered by rabbis and primarily much later on, about half-half, and very much in the Sephardic world because of Greek logic, because of the way Greeks organized their thoughts. Okay, but again, you can't generalize. You had the thinker Platon, who was very sporadic, and he viewed everything as in disharmony. Okay, Aristotle viewed the world as being in order. Okay, but the difference is that Maimonides is based on God. Okay, everything is God given. We serve God. We do mitzvot. Okay, the difference between the Sephardim and Ashkenazim is that most of the Sephardic ritual and exegesis, the writings, is on Sephardim codifying the law. Okay, so he was a very critical thinker. So, for example, he would critique the Goanim. He would critique some of the thinkers in the Gemara, in the Talmud, like Rabbah, and make them out to be trite, egotistical, revengeful, and this spurred tremendous animosity. So, in his, if you actually read in the various versions, the Moreh Nevuchim, you see that it's not what people try to pin him on. Okay, so he was very careful in how he wrote. He didn't accept everything Aristotle said, but Aristotle complimented him. Okay, so he basically critiques Aristotle that Aristotle doesn't understand the entirety of the earth, of creation, of God's role. And so he looks at like we do. The Rambam looks at God is infinite. We can't define God. And God created man and created the world. Now, there's some theories in ancient Judaism in particular, like the resurrection of the dead, which are very strange to us today, but they're cardinal. So, for example, he didn't give sources about the resurrection of the dead, and him and Aristotle had similar views, but he didn't, according to the Rambam, he didn't view the resurrection of of people in a physical sense, only in a spiritual sense. And that's why he was castigated in the beginning by the rabbis. So he was castigated more by rabbis who were a generation after him in Provence, mostly Ashkenazic rabbis, or there are some Sephardic rabbis. Also, in terms of Jewish thought, he was a pragmatist. So he believed in order and he believed in ethics. And a lot of the Provence thinkers were mystics. And there's additional elements of their thought, just like about the afterlife. And so for Maimonides, that wasn't really central or important. He took the basic theory, but he didn't have the traditional Jewish view that when there's the resurrection of the dead, you're resurrected spiritually and you come back in terms of your body. And so he only viewed it in terms of the soul. So he really drew a tremendous amount of criticism. And then, so he didn't quote anyone, and he didn't really tell where his sources were. So the next two generations, mostly in France, he was critiqued vehemently, and as if he just started Judaism with himself, okay, and forgot everything else. He didn't belittle the Gemara, but he was critical, okay. And so here, this was also Ashkenazi Jewry is a little different from the Sfaradim in terms of critical thought and in terms of methodology. I think the Ashkenazim in general are much more doctrinaire, and Sfaradim are much more practical. So the Rambam was the first, basically, to codify Jewish law. And then in the progression of things, after the expulsion from Spain, uh, what no, from I forgot his, you know it, from Salonika and Sfat. Okay, there's a continuation of the codification of Jewish law. Okay, and that's very cardinal to us. That's for the Sfaradim. That's the Beit Yosef. That's the basis of halacha, of Jewish law, but it's a Sephardic position. So Ashkenazim argued with that. Okay, so all the time people are arguing with the Rambam. How could you say such things? How come you forgot this? How come you didn't put this in? How come you're so Greek? Okay, how could you dare quote Greeks, Greek philosophers? That's a big difference between Sephardic rabbis and Ashkenazic rabbis. For Sephardic rabbis, quoting Greek thinkers was a norm. It doesn't mean they agreed with it, but they respected their logic. So, all the way from Yosef, from the Rambam to Yosef Karo in Salonika and Sfat and beyond, all the way to others. For example, there was Rabbi Almoznino in 16th century Salonika. He didn't deal with codification, he dealt with ethics. He translated Aristotle's book of ethics into Judeo-Spanish. That was not considered a controversial thing at all. And then one of the research projects I've done in recent years is on the mid-19th century Sephardic rabbi Amram Natan from Alexandria. He didn't accept Greek thought, but he analyzed it. He analyzed Greek thought in terms of what are the virtues and how it differs from Judaism, but how the Greeks organized Jewish thought. And for Ashkenazim, this is extremely controversial, and you could say, and in many circles, it's like not acceptable. So in rabbinic tradition in his time, the Rambam was accused of being like a Greek sophist. In the Gemara, the Gonim resented the Greek thinkers. You see, here's the paradox. At one time, in classical antiquity, the Jews and the Greeks had a good relationship. But then came Hellenism, the Jews became Hellenized. You had the Hasmonean regime, which went wild and fell. Then you had the Greek revolts. You had the Sadducees, who became Hellenized. And there was Jewish infighting and led to the destruction of the Second Temple. And so anything Greek was frowned upon. So this is where the Rambam really gets castigated. Now, then there are all these people who analyze without really looking and reading and make generalizations that the Rambam is a Hellenist, that the Rambam was totally Aristotelian, but he was different. And I want to read to you in Moreh Mivochim, in chapter 15, I'll read you 2 paragraphs. This is how the Rambam differentiated himself and critiqued Aristotle. In this chapter, I intend to show that Aristotle was well aware that he had not proved the eternity of the universe. He was not mistaken in this respect. He knew that he could not prove his theory, and that his arguments and proof were only apparent and plausible. They are the least objectionable, according to Alexander. But according to the same authority, Aristotle could not have considered them conclusive, after having himself taught us the rules of logic and the means by which arguments can be refuted or confirmed. The reason why I have introduced the subject is this. Later philosophers, disciples of Aristotle, assume that he has proved the eternity of the universe, and most of those who believe that they are philosophers blindly follow him in this point and accept all of his arguments as conclusive and absolute proofs. They consider it wrong to differ from Aristotle or to think that he was ignorant or mistaken in anything. For this reason, taking their standpoint, I show that Aristotle himself did not claim to have proved the eternity of the universe. He says in his book Physics as follows: all the physicists before us believe that motion is eternal, except Plato, who holds that motion is transient. According to his opinion, the heavens are likewise transient. Okay, so Aristotle thinks that all of history was conclusive, but the Rambam talks about creation. So before he says that God was eternal, but before the earth is not eternal. The earth, God created the earth. So before the earth existed, there was a vacuum. That's a huge difference between him and Aristotle and the whole Greek school. And then later on, there's a whole different path. So there's the Jewish philosophy, just like the resurrection of the dead, and all sorts of other principles that the Hellenists didn't have. Now, why was the Rambam controversial also? Because he developed the 13 principles of faith. And the other rabbi said, what is this? Who are you to make this the essential prayer for the Jewish people? And it took a few generations before that was accepted. And he was mostly accepted in the Sephardic world, but it took hundreds of years. Now, in each generation, there were Ashkenazim mostly who challenged him, but it didn't last. Like in Akko, there was someone, a Rabbi Petit, who challenged his view of the resurrection of the dead, and but the problem was that Petit was out politicized. The Nagid, the head of the Jewish, how would you call it? Not the community in Egypt, but the Jewish. He presided over the Jews of the region. Okay, and so, but the Nagid was the Rambam's grandson, and so Petit in the end didn't have a chance. Petit wanted to have an excommunication of the Rambam, but it didn't work. But in Provence, first of all, the Jews feared the Dominicans, and the Dominicans feared such an inspiring rabbi, and that's when they burned the Talmud, and there were protests. In Egypt, the grave of the Rambam's grandson was also burned by opponents of the Rambam, but it took a few generations until the Rambam became the acceptable norm. And so, because of all these little differences, it was like a big hullabaloo. It was always conflictual. Today, we can't imagine that the Rambam was out of line, that he was phlegmatic, that he was really too controversial. So now also another thing, the Rambam had to convert maybe 4 times to Islam, and so the other Jews, especially in Northern European countries, looked at this as like, this is heresy. But this is the Sephardic story of living underground and remaining Jewish and coming back and not losing your theology and your principles, and of course halacha. And so this also was a point of contention. But for example, the Yemenite Jews, they admired the Rambam for this. In his Igeret Teman, he talked about the importance of continuing to be Jewish, even if you have to convert, and there's always a way back. And for the Yemenites, he is the Rambam. Most of their theology, even today, is based on the Rambam. So, juxtaposed with what happened over 1,000 years ago, or about 1,000 years ago, it's a big transition. And then Chabad, for example, you've used the Rambam. You know, his laws for going to war are the norm. That's the Jewish halacha. The Rambam also was controversial because he viewed that it was forbidden for Jews to earn money from teaching halacha or Talmud, or for paying for a yeshiva. And the other rabbis thought, especially in Babylonia, well, this is nonsense. How do you maintain a yeshiva? But this goes back to the principle of working, and the Rambam had an order. You know, you eat a certain way, you have a certain routine, you have a certain norms, you have certain modesty, and that clashed with other rabbinic spheres, I'd say, for about 200 years, until the Rambam became the norm. Now, one thing which maybe you don't realize, that the Sephardim have a different way of studying and yeshiva studying than the Ashkenazim. The Ashkenazim argue. There are 2 points, and they're always arguing. There's the minority opinion and the majority opinion. The Sephardim have a different approach. First, they look at the Bible, and then they look at the etymology of the word. That originally was the Spanish Jewish yeshiva system in the community of Zamora for 4 generations before the expulsion. That was the norm of Rabbi Isaac Campanton. And after the dispersion, that was the Sephardic norm, to analyze the Bible according to the etymology of the word. And when you understand the word, that changes your whole conceptualization. Now, eventually, that system of learning fell by the wayside, except on the island of Jerba. Rabbi Mazuz, who just died recently in Israel, was the last who maintained that system of what's called the Shitata Yu. And on the island of Jerba, he and his ancestors preserved this. Now, I told you about this Rabbi Almos Nino who wrote about Aristotle's Ethics. But Almos Nino, here you see the essence of why analyzing the word is useful. Almos Nino's expertise was language, and beyond his mastery of Hebrew grammar, he was extremely sharp and sensitive for textual analysis of the pshat, the text plain literary meaning, as it was the way of the Sephardic rabbis. He analyzes the pshat independently from the midrashim, from, let's say, the fables. The Megillah describes Achashverosh as an inexperienced, naive king. What defines a king's lack of experience? The king is surrounded by advisors. The advisors very often would give the king an advice that favors them personally, rather than the king or the kingdom. They would always disguise their advice as if they were favoring the king or the kingdom. An experienced king is able to detect these tricks. An inexperienced king would be tricked by his advisors' maneuvers. The book of Esther is presenting us with this fact. Achashverosh, his third year in power, to anticipate the king is inexperienced. Later on in the Megillah, we see that all kind of maneuvers coming from Haman, which Achashverosh was unable to detect. When Haman presented the king with his plan to kill the Jews, his way to achieve a personal vendetta for a private affront. Haman describes the plan not as related to his private interest, but to the king's interest. These people do not follow your rules. It is in the interest of the king to let his people live. The inexperienced king took the bait. Asam mishte l'chol sarav v'avadav. The king threw a party to all of his servants, ergo, says Rabbi Almos Nino. The king is a people pleaser. Normally, the people would honor the king, throwing a party in his honor. But Achashverosh was insecure in his people's loyalty and of their love for him. He must have had the emotional need to be loved and praised in order to feel good with himself. Therefore, his decisions will be made having in mind not the benefit of the kingdom, but his own image. As a people pleaser, he would do and execute whatever would reflect positively in his image and vice versa. So this analysis is much different than anything you've ever heard. And this is based on the literal meaning of the word that Almos Nino analyzed, and he didn't do this out of the blue. This is a tradition from Spain of Sephardic rabbinical analysis, which is based on analyzing the word. So you look at the word, and then you take it in many, many different areas. And if you think about it today, we don't speak biblical Hebrew. What is all this? We don't speak Aramaic. What are all these concepts? And even if we understand the meaning of the word in today's sense, we don't understand what it meant 2,000 years ago. And this is sort of the brilliance of Sephardic Jewry and the brilliance of Sephardic commentary. And it starts with the Rambam, who led this independent path and just didn't follow the precedences of Ashkenazi Jewry arguing in the Talmud over a certain sugya, a certain case. Okay, and so the Rambam got a tremendous amount of flack for his independence, but he was smeared. He believed in God, and then everything else is secondary. But he used Greek philosophy to make an order in Jewish thought. And that is very foreign to Ashkenazim and Ashkenazi thought, and even till today. I'm not going to give you the examples. I gave many examples of how Ashkenazim twisted what the Rambam said, and twisted the case, and twisted his ideas, and slurred him, and smeared him. And many academics many works have been made about the Rambam, and a lot of the analysis is as if Hellenism and Judaism is totally interchangeable. It's not. Now, in this book, in Moreh Nevuchim, going here, the Rambam is so confrontational that in the second part, in chapter 15, which differs from any other translation I saw, he accused Aristotle of being a liar 3 times. So that is much different than him basing himself on Aristotle and being the ultimate Aristotle lover and having them in a relationship where they're totally interchangeable. And so I think it's important to really delve into texts if you can, so that you get sort of an appreciation where people are coming from. So we all think that the Rambam is the authority today, but it took a long time to get to where he was. There were many Sfaradim after him who challenged him because they were nitpicking or they didn't understand where he's coming from. Okay, and you can objectively say, okay, he didn't like in exegesis, he didn't quote his works. Okay, so there's a lot of room for raising eyebrows. But to date, he is our ultimate thinker. And we find a tremendous amount of virtue in him. He also had his extreme side. He was not liberal at all. The Karaites challenged Rabbinic Judaism, and the Rambam's position was it's okay and preferable to execute the Karaites. Today, the Karaites are part of the Jewish people. But so you see, the Rambam had very many sides. He was much more tolerant toward the Greeks, who, in the jargon in Jewish history, they're our adversaries. They're the devil. They're the evil. They will Hellenize us. They will make us assimilate. But the Sfaradim for over 1,000 years used Greek logic as a point of departure. Now, lastly, in Rabbi Natan Amram's thinking and works in Alexandria in the mid-19th century, he dealt with Greek thought, not because he was an Alexander, but that was the method of an erudite Sephardic rabbinic thinker. So he wrote the book Noam Midot, and he divided it according to good virtues, and he divided it by alphabetically by various thinkers, and the main points were ahavat haboreh, love for God, the Creator, and the value of tshuva, of repentance. And so this is much different than anything you've ever heard. And this is based on a Greek philosophical analysis. He castigated Aristotle and Plato and Sophocles and all of them. But you can ask, why in the middle of the 19th century, when hardly anyone understands what he's writing about, hardly anyone in his community can read and understand what he's talking about, why is he dealing with these subjects? And it's not because he's bored and he has nothing else to do. It's because this is part of Sephardic tradition. And he's been newly rediscovered. He wrote, 70, 80 rabbinic works. And so Greek thought is part of his analysis. And again, he doesn't take it at face value, but for him, it's a way of making order and logic. And so the Sephardic rabbis admired the logic of Greek thinkers, whereas in Babylonia and the Ashkenazi rabbis, they thought these people were the devils and always challenging Jews and Judaism. But another thing is that the Jews used the same Greek techniques. In Byzantium, the Jewish rabbis and thinkers used riddles. That was the Greek system. That's how the Jews thought, and that's how the Jews expressed themselves. And all this is not Ashkenazi tradition. Byzantium is pre-Sephardic for the most part, but it's a different way of viewing it. And so the Jewish people is not monolithic; it's very diverse. And thanks to your rabbi, I, he requested that I talk about this, and I researched it, and it ties in with a lot of things. But it's not easy to analyze Jewish thought and rabbinic thought, and it's not a matter of just knowing the Hebrew or the Aramaic. I tried to find in Arabic a little of what the Rambam wrote, so see if he was not misquoted or misunderstood. But he knew what he was talking about, and he was very systematic, and he was critical. And that's why in the first generations, primarily, that's why he was resented, because you don't criticize the Talmud. Okay, you don't criticize a lot of the rabbis, and he did, and he was really baiting in his the way he depicted them, and they resented him. Today we don't even know about that. But so all this was part of the conflict. So it was partly theological, but mostly it was personal. And I tried to emphasize what Sephardic tradition is and what Sephardic rabbinic tradition is. And you have a nice beginning in Dallas, and there's not a lot of Sephardic rabbinic tradition anymore. And the Sephardic Halacha is very ignored. A lot was destroyed in the Holocaust when the Jews of the Balkans were annihilated, and through assimilation and in Israel through the whole acculturation process, Sephardic halacha is downplayed. But the Rambam is the base of this. And then, as I said, it goes through Yosef Karo and on and on and on. For us, Yosef Karo is, as the Sephardic thinker, he is the authority. But also, he's perverted. Ovadia Yosef doesn't necessarily quote him and use him in his entirety. It's very selective. And there are issues of ego, and there are issues of different traditions. So we don't really have anymore the Spanish and Balkan Sephardic tradition as a vibrant, living rabbinic or even general culture. And so, thank you very much.
So we can open it up to some questions, Dr. Kerem?
Yeah.
I have a question, if you don't mind. If you could expand upon the conflict between the rabbis of Provence, who seem, at least according to Rabbi Joseph Aour, he posits them as, since they're more mystically inclined, he seems to posit this idea that they have this conflict with what they perceive as rationalism. I wondered if you might share your thoughts on that, where you think that's accurate, and how today the groups that we identify as mystical, they use the Rambam, right? Chabad, other Hasidic groups use these texts, right? Without any.
So of course, that was the difference between the rationalists and the rabbis of Provence, but it's not conclusive. The Ramban, he was combative also toward the Rambam, but he respected him, and he didn't want to like jab him. Okay, so I wrote a book review once on Moshe Idel's use of mysticism in social psychology and psychiatry, and there most of the book talks about the Ramban as the mystic. Okay, and so that there were differences in how they approached issues, but the Ramban would not condemn Maimonides, whereas the others would. And for the many of the others, he was a disaster. He just he we can't handle, you know. But there were stronger forces. When the Dominicans rioted, okay, people realized, well, this can't go on. Okay, in other words, the rabbis uh, well, thinks to the Dominicans, okay, against the Rambam, and there were riots, okay. So this is not acceptable by in terms of Jewish communal standard. And then, like in Akko, as I said, all right, after two generations, they wanted to confront the Rambam, but politically, it wasn't possible. And after that, it sort of dissipated. You had in the fourth and fifth generation some Sephardic thinkers who objected or had differences of opinion with the Rambam and with the rationalists, because the Rambam doesn't accept a lot of the miracles which are at the base of classical Jewish theology. So I think this is part of the issue. So and Kabbalah is later actually. So Kabbalah evolved like right after the Rambam, okay, which also is a paradox, but it has nothing to do with him. There were still pockets left in Spain, and he was already in North Africa. And his son was a Sufi mystic, and so his son took things in a different direction. What we notice about his son, he had a lot of Karaite characteristics. So, for example, they didn't sit in chairs; they sat on the floor and they prostrated. Like we prostrate on Yom Kippur, but they prostrated all the time. You know, when you said the Aleinu, you prostrated. We don't do that anymore. Okay, so his descendants took Jewish practice also in different ways, but it wasn't thought of as heretical. Just the fact that he was a rationalist was more outlandish, and the rabbis they had a hard time to contend with that. And so what happens afterward is totally different. So, like I said, people pick and choose. So the Rambam is, he's the hero for the Yemenites. He's the model for Chabad in all sorts of ways. And I think that he was so extensive that that's why he's so respected. And so the fact that he was a little controversial in the beginning about using Hellenistic or Greek rationalism uh, probably was actually a temporary blockade in people's minds. Okay? And so, but when things got really bad in Spain with under Christian rule, that people didn't care about that anymore. Okay, that wasn't at all an imminent danger, or their lives were much different. There was already expulsions at the end of the 14th century, and so the uh, the Jew the Jews had other worries, and I think so. But as time went on, I think because he was so erudite and had so much to say about so many things, that's why he is so respected. Because today he's envisioned as the ultimate. He's not envisioned as the provocateur. Okay, but at the time he was very provocative. Okay, how can you take Greek logic and organize Judaism along those lines? What kind of chutzpah is that? What kind of audacity? And today that's disappeared. It's not part of general cognizance at all in the Jewish world. But you see, for the Sfaradim, like he converted, and he had to contend with Judaism under Islam. That was normative for the Sephardic world. So he was more revered than castigated. Okay, and he was empathized. And so later on, the Sephardim are Anusim, the Marano. And this went on for a long time, not just 1492. This went on for many centuries afterward. We have some tail ends of it now, in Brazil and Mexico and New Mexico, Colorado. But um, so the Sfaradim in general had a lot of tolerance and admiration for the Rambam. And by the time you have Yosef Karo, Yosef Karo bases himself on three sources, and one of them is the Rambam. So the Rambam was not outlandish. If the Rambam is one of the two sources out of three that goes by a certain halacha, then Yosef Karo puts that as admissible halacha. In his day, he was like, the devil.
I put in the chat, if somebody wants to ask a question, they can put it in the chat or they can unmute themselves. While we're waiting for that, did Shlomo want to ask something? Okay, well, I'll wait for them to comment. I wondered if you could explain a little bit more about the conversion that you mentioned. I knew about one conversion, at least when they were fleeing the Almohades, but you mentioned several potential conversions. That was actually something that I had not heard of.
So we know of four conversions, and some of them were in North Africa, not just the first one in Cordoba or wherever. So the Jews not just after the expulsion. In these tumultuous times, the Almohadin regime was very, say, anti-Jewish.
Somehow Shlomo became.
And you hear? So anyway, he had to convert more than once in North Africa, not in Egypt, but and we don't know too much more about it, but it's cited.
Does anyone else have any questions that they'd like to raise?
So just add, at the same time, in Yemen, the Jews were paralyzed because of all the efforts to convert them to Islam. And that's why they identified so much with the Rambam. The Yemenites, they have two heroes, the Rambam and Sajjah Gaon. They have a system of prayer of Sajjah Gaon, which they do until today, and the Rambam is their halachic thinker. Then of course, there's an anti-Rambam camp too, but most are pro-Rambam. Yes, Guillermo.
Thank you very much. My question is, at some point in time, I'm not sure if I heard you correctly associating the Babylonian Talmud with Ashkenazi thought. Did I get this right when you said?
Yeah, because the Ashkenazim took it in a different way. Okay,
but the Talmud
the Sfaradim studied Talmud too, but the prime emphasis was on biblical commentary. Okay, whereas for the Ashkenazim, the emphasis is not on biblical commentary. They don't, in the yeshivot, they don't study the Bible. They only study Gemara.
Okay, thank you.
Do we have any other questions? Actually, there's a couple things in the chat. It says, can Dr. Kerem speak more about the etymology approach of the Sephardic tradition? And is there any focus on this today or non-existent, as you say?
Well, Rabbi Mezuz still kept it on in Israel, in Bnei Brak at his yeshiva. But I think as time went on, it fell by the wayside, also because of Sabbatianism, because the whole movement of the false Messiah Shabtai Tzvi had ruined standard Jewish thought, and all throughout the whole Jewish world there was ecstasy, and so in the Sephardic world there was a return to the basics, and then the basics are, okay, you study Gemara and none of this Kabbalah, and none of this going off into into the other world, and no more frenzies, and no more how do you say premature messianic anticipation. So then the Rambam was more subtle about the Messiah. You understand? And I think the Sephardim in general were more subtle, except though that after the expulsion, we still don't understand what happened. But there was the move to Sfat and toward Kabbalistic ritual. In Sfat, you had many different groups of Mekubalim, also from North Africa. That lasted as long as Sfat was a center for fabrics and silk. That lasted, but then there were earthquakes and fires, and Sfat deteriorated economically. But then there was the Sabbatian explosion. It was a huge tremor in the Jewish world, and so after that, the standard Jewish thought became, and Halacha became the norm. In Salonika, after Shabtai Tzvi, many more standard halachic works were published. Many more. That led to all sorts of other types of stagnation, et cetera, et cetera. But so I think it led to a dampering of creativity. So this Shitat Iyun of Kampanton was it was only 4 generations. Before that, there were other things. Okay, it wasn't, but it was a distinct style of analyzing, which was much different than any parallels in Provence and already in beginning in Poland. And so, yeah, he hasn't the Daniel Boyarin published a book on the Shitat Ayun in Spain, and there's someone who did a doctorate, Uriel Loberbaum, but he didn't publish his doctorate in Jerusalem. So they go into it more about what is the system and what they analyze. But for our purposes, it's kind of abstract, okay? But also, I once heard a lecture a long time ago about how if you didn't understand Judeo-Arabic or Arabic, you didn't understand a lot of the motifs that the Rambam was talking about. And you didn't understand the motifs of Kabbalah and mysticism at that time. So these ideas are much different in Arabic and Judeo-Arabic than they've been rehashed, you know. So I notice in all these versions that they're much different. As a version which was published in medieval Spain is much different than the version that was published in Krakow in 1882 or something.
There's 2 other questions, Dr. Kerem. There's one that states, I've heard of the Rambam's apophatic theology. Is the origin of that something of his own, or is it from Greek thought? I don't know if you can see the chat. You might be able to see the actual question if you didn't hear me.
Well, I think that he adapted that. Okay, he wasn't thought of as a rational thinker per se. He was thought of as a halachicist, and also he has the underpinnings of a mystic. In his writings, you don't really see a lot of mysticism. You have to really peel a lot away. The Ramban was a very Sephardic tradition. Okay, and we all know about the debate. Okay, there's no rationalism there. It's theology. It's showing our devotion to God. It's showing what we believe in. You know, putting Jesus in a certain place that the Jews want to put him in. and so I'll have to explore that. I don't want to give you a conclusive answer to that.
Okay. And then there's another question that says, can you speak a little bit more about miracles and what the Rambam believes? So you mentioned about his, I guess the metaphorical aspects of his or allegorical aspects of what he attributed to miracles in the Torah. If you could maybe expound on that a little bit in terms of his perspectives.
So that here, I think the rationalism plays a part. I mean, there are the obvious events: the burning bush, the crossing of the Nile. Okay, that there's not a lot of room for analysis, but in Jewish tradition, you have a lot of mysticism, okay, and in Sephardic life too. Okay, today we think that there's more mystical beliefs amongst Sephardim and Mizrahim than Ashkenazim, but that's not exactly so. The Ashkenazim had all their how do you say, emunot tefillot, their all sorts of what we would call wives' tales, but today are called folk beliefs. So for example, the Rambam didn't talk about cameos. Okay, he didn't talk about um, amulets and all sorts of and talismans and symbols like that. But that's more in Kabbalah. But that also was mainstream. It wasn't just a mystic. Okay, but when a baby was born, there was a special in the Sephardic world, in Ashkenaz world, there was a special woman who actually would write verses, to hang over the crib of the baby, not just put garlic or whatever. And so there's sort of a fine line between what is an aberration of Judaism and what is acceptable. But because of mysticism, we have a lot of practices. We had and we have a lot of practices which are theologically based. And then for every practice you have like that, there's a rabbinical judgment saying, no, this is heresy. Okay, the Rambam was attacked as heretical because he didn't go by the established system of Gemara, and he didn't give his sources, and then he was accused of not ignoring the physical side of the resurrection of the dead. But he really wasn't heretical. But when you're talking about egos, you're talking about rabbinical egos and authorities, and who is this guy, and how come he has the audacity to write this and base it on Greeks? That's like he drew a he got on the nerves of a lot of rabbis because he based himself and commented on Greek theology and used it as opposed to just bashing it. And today we have a lot of critiques and analysis of Greek concepts and Persian concepts in the Gemara. It's more academic than Talmidim Chachamim. But so someone like the Rambam, his angle was to show that there's a lot of logic that can be util to Jewish thought, and that was abhorrent. Okay, the Jews had admired the Greeks and Alexander the Greek, etc., etc. But then later on, when the Romans and the Greeks, did everything they did against us in the Second Temple, then the idea of the Greek was the devil, and what the Greek the Hellenistic influence on the high priests and the priests, that influenced the Jewish world to really, really not want to deal with Greeks and Hellenism. And so the Rambam, much later, using Hellenism as like, he arose the wrath of the rabbinic class. Like, how dare you? And historically, in the Ottoman Empire, the Greeks were the Greek Orthodox were the ones who instigated the blood libels against them. Okay, so for a Sephardic Jew, they remember that, a little bit, also the Armenians, but mostly the Greek Orthodox. And so this is like, Judaism, like Chaim Soloveitchik, he's an academic, but from the Soloveitchik family. For him, everything, Greek is an anti-Semite. The Gentiles are anti-Semites. Okay? The Greeks are all against us. As I analyze all this as it's harmony, disharmony, coexistence. The Jews influenced the Greeks influenced the Jews. There were good times, there were bad times. Sometimes the Greeks were animosic, and they had animosity against the Jews, and vice versa. And the original polemic we had with the Christians, the early Christians, was over proselytism. Okay, and not theology. And then it took off in different ways. And the Catholics especially were antagonistic to the Jews. The Eastern Orthodox, including the Greek Orthodox and the Copts and all of them, they based a lot of their theology on the Jews. They're the calendar, traditions, mysticism also, but their halacha, their law. And so there's also a different dynamic. But when it came to politics, the Jews were always the scapegoat, and for the Jews, what the Greeks, they're the devils, and of course, there's the motif of Hanukkah, which is all out of proportion, but it's like the Greeks are the terrible guys, but the Jews in the Second Temple period were also feisty, but what remained is the Greeks, and especially they killed us in Egypt. They killed over 1 million Jews. The Jews rebelled in Cyprus too, and 220,000 Jews were killed in the beginning of the Common Era, or even before that. So it's like this is the stereotype. This is the conception of the Greek. So for the Rambam to talk about Greek rationalism and Aristotle, for most of the rabbis, is like, what is this? Why are you basing yourself on all these heretical figures who have harassed us? And then in Byzantium, although the Byzantines on a practical level were okay, and the Jews were small, their legislation was terrible. In Visigothic Spain and in the Byzantine Empire, the theology of Justinian and many others was to kill the Jews. And so obviously the stigma against the Gentiles and Greeks is extremely negative. So for the Rambam to even introduce all of this was thought of as heretical, and of course people didn't want to really take a hard look at what he was saying, and it was more convenient just to bash him because he's being so outlandish.
Well, Dr. Kerem, we're at the hour, and I just wanted to thank you for the very interesting lecture, the overview of the Rambam and his connections to Hellenistic thought, to Greek thought, and using that as a basis for, I think in many ways you said alignment and also differentiating where those points are appropriate to Jewish thought. Thank you so much on behalf of Congregation Zohar Yisrael. I'm going to be referring people to the academia page, which of course has many of your articles and many of your different works. And thank you again for just providing an overview of such a fascinating topic. And again, many thanks. And hopefully when you're in Dallas next time, we'll be able to meet, and perhaps we can schedule an in-person, event.
Yeah, I would love to come for Shabbat, because as I mentioned to the rabbi, we have an annual Holocaust Scholars Conference. This year they didn't have it, but I've been in Dallas maybe 10 times already for this annual conference. So it's always a challenge to find a place for Shabbat and Purim and whatever. And I'd like to see your Sephardic congregation and
Yes.
see who you are. And also, I do genealogy, so that might be of interest to some of you. But I try to keep up networking in the Sephardic world. We'll say, put it like that.
Absolutely. Well, we look forward to that opportunity in the future, and thank you so much. We look to
Thank you very much.
Thank you. All right.
Good night.
Good night.